Hello everyone and welcome back to another Babbling Irons video with myself and Mike today. Managerial breakdown, and this one, interestingly, is starting to pick up a little bit of pace, Mike, in the media. Julen Lopetegui, obviously former of Wolves, former of Sevilla, former of Real Madrid, former of Spain. You know, he's got quite the CV to him. But when you kind of look at and break it down, which we're going to do, it's been a kind of up and down, turbulent career, to be honest. He's had some success, but he's also had some quite high profile failures. So that's our job, to break it down, give our honest assessment of what Lopetegui could bring to West Ham if he is to become the new manager, and whether we're on board with the signing of Lopetegui this summer, if that is going to happen. So let's just start with giving the people kind of an overview of his managerial career. So obviously started very early at Rayo Vallecano, like 20 years ago now. He then went to kind of coach the under-19s, under-20s, under-21s at Spain. Then went on to the Spain national team for a little bit as well, a bit after that. But between those, I think he managed Porto, where it wasn't a success. He spent quite a bit of money. He just didn't have the success. And obviously Porto, one of the Portuguese giants, didn't manage to win the league there or anything notable during that time. And he was only there a couple of years. He then moved on to Sevilla, Real Madrid, sorry, where that was kind of his dream job. And again, like, it just didn't work out for him. It was just an absolute mess. He wasn't there long. He was there for a few months, and then he went to Sevilla, and that was where his first real success came as a manager, really, because what he was doing at Sevilla was actually quite impressive. They were kind of finishing around 7th in the league, 6th in the league, 8th in the league, around kind of that ballpark. And he came in and he managed to finish in the top 4 with them in consecutive seasons, which was really good. And he also won them the Europa League. So he's got that to his CV. But again, it kind of went downhill after that, which we'll get into with the data. He then took the Wolves job, which, again, there's been a lot of controversy around what happened with that. But again, it wasn't a successful time, and he left less than a year into the job, and was replaced by Gary O'Neill. He's now out of a position, so he's a free agent, effectively. That's kind of the summary of his background. Initial thoughts on Lopetegui, Mike, as a manager, rather than what we're going to get into about the off-field antics as well.
Yeah, I find it underwhelming. I'm not saying ostensibly he's a bad manager or he's a poor manager. I think that would be harsh of me to say so, despite my initial resistance to it. You know, I was quite, very cool. I don't really want it to happen. And obviously we saw what the Milan fans did as well. But the reason I find it so underwhelming is because when you're linked to the likes of Amorim, regardless of how slim a chance it is for, say, the likes of Amorim, and there is a chance. There's always a chance, because as long as you're talking, there's a chance, and that is still happening. So as thin as it is, that it is there. But there's also the likes of Fonseca, who appears to be far more open, or at least outwardly, in what we're told, he's really open to speaking to West Ham, and we've come close to getting him before. So when you look at those two, you kind of then really, you set your stall, I think, there as a fan. Certainly myself, I know others may look at it differently, but I think you then go, well, that is something that I want to see. And then, to be fair, there is a level of bias with myself when it comes to that, because I've looked at Amorim and Fonseca for the past 3 seasons and saying that they are managers that I want to manage us when Moyes eventually left. That wasn't because I expected Moyes to go soon or I wanted Moyes out. It was just the fact that they're a style that I like, and I felt that when we got to a certain point with Moyes where we wouldn't necessarily progress further, or the club or Moyes had come to a point where I think we probably hand our run even, let's move on. They were the guys that I were looking at and really wanted. So
why is Lopetegui being mentioned now? Why is he on the shortlist? What type of manager is he, for those who maybe aren't aware of his style?
I think first and foremost, we know he's been recommended because he's also being represented by a familiar agent to West Ham and to David Sullivan. So I think that smooths negotiations quite considerably. And him being free, again, it is a tune that David Sullivan absolutely loves. It's a position much like goalkeeper for many a year. that David Sullivan actually put zero value in. And you can't say that is untrue because he's not paid compensation. The only one where we have, and I know it's going to be disputed, pick up, well, he paid himself out of his contract, was Pellegrini. But it's even if Pellegrini paid himself out, how do you think he afforded to do that? Yes, he was very rich from his time in China, but he was also paid by the club to do that as part of a signing on fee. Would be, this is going to be covering your cost to do, because it would have been a cheaper option. So they have paid it, but they've done it in a roundabout way. So Lopetegui is free, right? So there's that. So for Sullivan, his CV is impressive. When you look at Porto, we can say it wasn't a success. However, they only lost 3 games. Yes, they didn't win the league, but they only lost 3 games in that period. It earned him then.
He didn't win any trophies though, Mike.
He didn't. No, but that's the thing. That's why it isn't a success, because it's Porto, and to go for a season not winning, only losing 3 games, not winning a trophy, it isn't acceptable.
Yeah, I think the best he did was a quarter final in the Champions League. That was as far as it got.
So for Porto, not winning a title is deemed unsatisfactory.
Yeah,
especially at that time, because Benfica wasn't necessarily the team that they've been in recent years, and Sporting wasn't the team that they've been in recent years as well. So for them not to win, it is pretty much a failure, because they were in that period.
He then went to Spain, didn't he? And then obviously the controversy around what happened at the 2018 World Cup, where he pretty much just ditched them and went to Real Madrid. So there's obviously that element where there's the behind.
In fairness to him, he was sacked, but as you say, he effectively ditched them, because he, unbeknownst to the FA, was talking with Real Madrid. I know at Real Madrid is like the pantheon of job offers and clubs to manage. However, on the eve of a major tournament, to then be announcing you're going to be going to Real Madrid, I can understand the Spanish FA having the nose being put out of joint, and then just saying, actually, we don't want this mess and this noise. And even on the eve of a major tournament, goodbye. And I think done pretty well during that period. In 20 games, I think he had a pretty good win rate as well. I think they averaged it for like points. If it was to be points wise, it's like 2 point something per
2.4,
game. So it was actually really good way of going.
14 wins, 6 draws.
Yeah, but again, I think as part of that, they were going into this major tournament and they felt, I guess, a bit betrayed, for a lack of a better term, and they decided to sack him. So he went to Madrid and it all collapsed. So all of that controversy to then end in 14 games was just probably the biggest humiliation he's probably had in his career, I would say.
He had what, 6 wins and 6 defeats, 2 draws, and that was it. That was. I mean, he got spanked in a couple games. Obviously, that Barcelona game was probably the nail in the coffin.
And I think I know people will argue, well, he did lose Cristiano Ronaldo, so he lost goals. That's a fair point. However, you still had the likes of Karim Benzema at the team, so it's kind of. You kind of go a bit, well, boo-hoo. You lost Cristiano Ronaldo. Fantastic, phenomenal player, granted. However, you were at Real Madrid, who has a plethora of brilliant players. Yeah. So you kind of don't necessarily feed into the kind of the doldrums that maybe some would kind of suggest, because Ronaldo was incredibly important to Real Madrid. However, they've also shown since his move, they're actually probably a better side now. They're actually a team as opposed to this collection of individuals that kind of really pushed everything towards this one player.
Yeah, I guess then he then went on to Sevilla. Obviously, that was his longest managerial stint by far, like 179 games, averaging 1.82 points per game. He had a really successful time there from around 2019 to 2022. He was there before it kind of again went downhill in that final part of the season for him in 2022. So again, we've got some data for you to run through as well, Mike, to kind of analyze how he was stylistically for Sevilla, and what kind of changed the season after their success, because they won the Europa League in 2020. They were consistently finishing the top 4 of La Liga.
They were even finishing the second. I think in his second season they were second up to week 29. Yeah. Before then, it all kind of started to fall away, and then they finished 4th. But it's, as you say, they were consistent. They were performing well under him. They were getting in the top half. They were starting to push, and he did raise expectations at Sevilla to not just kind of be a team that well, we're a European Cup team who does really well in Europa League. We pushed maybe for top 4 Europe every year.
Yeah.
A team that was then, because of those first 2 seasons and how he got them playing, there was this idea of, well, actually, we are probably good enough to break that monopoly of Barcelona, Real Madrid, and Atletico, because in that second season where they were second up to week 29, the consistency was there. However, problems within their team and within their recruitment started to show, and they started to creep.
Well, what about like if we're looking at the style comparison for that Sevilla team, we've got something to show up here to kind of just kind of explain this data and what this shows for the style comparison here for Sevilla.
Yeah, so what this kind of say, so this is obviously the 2022-2023 season, and it's obviously then got Sevilla from 2021-22. So what it's showing is in that third season, his last season at Sevilla is quite a bit of a gear change. So they tended to be very pass heavy. So as you can see, pass per sequence. So they're very possession based. It says slow and intricate. That probably shouldn't be looked at as maybe a kind of derogatory statement, because obviously you look at Barcelona, look at Real Madrid, that they are kind of there. But what it means is that they were patient. They looked to kind of move the ball from side to side, looked to kind of trigger the opposition to press, to then break into spaces and pass into those kind of gaps, and then to punish. So they looked to kind of, a game of attrition really, and starve the opposition of the ball, and to sucker them in to then exploit any spaces. What happened the following year, they became far more direct. Now, part of that reason is they lost Koundé, and they lost, I believe it's Carlos. I can't remember his name. I'm pretty sure it's Carlos, who then went to Aston Villa. So they lost their 2 main centre-backs. So their ability to play out from defence was radically changed, because they had a revolving door of centre-backs. They had a young centre-back who came from Bayern Munich, whose name just escaped me, who, whilst being a very talented young prospect, he's an 18-year-old. To frost an 18-year-old, regardless of their ability, unless they are truly, truly exceptional, they're probably going to have some struggles. So they were unable to play the same way, because they didn't have, the ball playing play like they did in Koundé, and they didn't also have the play like Carlos, who was incredibly ferocious defensively. So they couldn't play out as they used to. So they had to be a little bit more direct. And if we look again in that 2021-22 season, if you go back to the one you just had this.
Sorry, there we go.
From a defensive point of view, they were able to play quite high because of their defense had good pace, it had good aggressiveness. The whole team was able to push higher up the field. So you can see a lot of turnovers were made in that final third. 225 turnovers in that kind of front end, with 4 of them resulting in a goal, which is, is great. If that turnover is forcing goals, it's fantastic. You'd probably hope for more. However, 33 of those turnovers resulted in a shot on goal. 4 of those resulted directly into a goal. So when you look at that, that's nearly 40 turnovers over a course of the season that has resulted in either a shot or a goal, is actually very encouraging, because then you would argue if you had more clinical players or better shot creation, that could turn into a lot more. So
what that's showing is, I guess, like that they are going to play that high pressing to try and win the ball back as high as possible, which we're seeing as a theme throughout the Premier League this season for kind of the teams doing really well, is you're trying to win the ball back as fast as you can in areas that are high up. I mean, Trent Alexander-Arnold alluded to it in an interview he did recently. Like, Klopp's motto is, if you lose the ball in the final third, push them to win it back. Like, just trigger the press, because it's unlike, like, it's the risk versus reward is there. So if you can get that turnover, like you say, it only resulted in 4 goals for Sevilla during that season. Probably could have been a bit more clinical, but 33 shots, I'm sure a lot of those were high quality shots as well. So yeah, interesting.
And it also makes the game far more exciting from a fan point of view, because all of a sudden you are on the edge of your seat, and it also makes your defense your best form of attack. I think it's Thiago Motta has said his first defender is his centre forward. Yeah. His first attacker is his goalkeeper. And that's kind of where football is going. And it's just he's just change those terminologies in terms of motto. And that's kind of what football's been about for a long time, but people haven't necessarily talked about it in that same kind of way. And that high press allows you to essentially to suffocate the opposition. And again, it is a high risk, high reward, because if they break your press, then you can be exposed. However, if you win the ball back, it does mean you can have a great number of shots. And if we look at this, and this is over obviously a 10-game period, this is in the final season where they wasn't as clinical, or not even as good as they had been. They were struggling defensively as well because of who they lost. But 21 goals from 20, from an expected 21.6 shows that they were still fairly clinical. And we see from a shot concentration, they mainly were from inside the area. So he doesn't really look to, create chances from outside. They're often quite, very much central, very much within the kind of between the penalty to 6-yard area. That's where predominantly most of the goals have come from, around that 6-yard area. And if we look at Wolves, for instance, really kind of the comparison is almost the same. That the way in which they look to kind of create and score, they look to kind of create a lot from out wide. This was obviously when he took over at Wolves. Now, this is where he had to adapt his style, one, for the players that he had at Wolves compared to what he had at Sevilla, which was a lot more possession-based, pass-heavy, slow, intricate football, looking to kind of make those intricate little passes between lines. At Wolves, it was far more akin to David Moyes, really. Get the ball in the channels, get into the flanks, get the ball into the area, and also try and play from set pieces. And we can see here in this kind of set here, 7 assists came from out wide. If we look, the ones in red, they all came from out wide, essentially. And they had an expected kind of assists from this kind of situation of 12. So it's quite a drop. Now, some of that is because, again, hanging crosses, high crosses, they kind of floated into the area. So they're bombarding the defense, and they're kind of creating opportunities. But again, they're not high value kind of opportunities. Just because the ball goes into the area, it does create a chance. However, the value is not necessarily that good to create. And the goals that they scored and where they had shots from, again, predominantly in the area, predominantly in the 6-yard area. So it's a lot about getting the ball in those channels, getting the ball into that kind of dead man area, really, for a goalkeeper, the penalty spot, 6-yard area. And so there are consistent themes of sorts. However, what we saw is at Wolves, he adapted more to be, I guess, a bit more like David Moyes. They were arguably more clinical because they finished above us. They were below us in the league at that when he joined.
He had 20. I think he was there for 26, 27 games, won 9, lost 9, drew 8, points per game of around 1.35. So wasn't really like his most notable thing he did at Wolves really was taking them away from the relegation zone, took them away from danger, similar to what David Moyes did when he first came in, and the second time as well. And he also got to the semi-final of an FA Cup. But other than that, it wasn't. It was underwhelming, and I think there was obviously parts that played into that. Obviously, the lack of transfer activity from his side that he felt he just couldn't work with. And we know that Wolves is on a very tight budget right now, and they can't really action a lot of stuff. So he was probably getting frustrated. And again, like we said, during his time in Sevilla, he was playing this really nice fluid football. Again, it was a nice balance of possession based, but also high press, high turnover stuff when they did lose the ball. And again, he likes to play that kind of 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1 adaptation. Fullbacks going forwards, providing the width and delivering crosses, like you said there, with the kind of shot allocation for both Wolves and Sevilla. So where did it go wrong for him at Wolves? Do you think it was more like the clash of the board, the lack of transfer activity, where he just wasn't allowed to make the changes that he needed to?
So I think at Wolves, the problem was obviously what happened in the summer, where effectively they were told no more money. They have to sell players to kind of go and buy. I think also the Jorge Mendes relationship, not necessarily soured, but it kind of went a bit on the back burner as well. So they kind of lost, I guess, that faucet, or that tap was kind of turned off a little. You know, he did kind of galvanise Wolves and pull them back from what Bruno Lage had done, which, you know, they were really struggling. So he did do well in some respects. However, the attitude in which he left for me is really sour. And bearing in mind the what we see at West Ham every window, or predominantly every window, especially when we look at January.
Yeah.
And we look at a situation that happened this January for us where all people wanted, say, Osman. And David Sullivan had his friend in his ear who is talking because he has an ulterior motive. He wants a bit of cash, probably looking to give him a little bit of cash back, or a little bit of a, you know, a rub, shall we say, back to the club, or David Sullivan to bringing in an agent of his.
Yeah.
And ultimately scuppered the deal, killed the deal that everyone at the club wanted from a playing perspective, but the board, I say the board, one board member didn't want because of he was getting talks from his agent friend, and it completely scuppered the deal. Now, with that in mind, if we look at what happened with Julen Lopetegui, he felt that he wasn't going to get the money that he wanted, wasn't being supported, and rather than working within the means that he had, he walked. It kind of felt as if he felt he was bigger than Wolves at that point. It's like, well, I am who I am. Look what I've done at Sevilla. If you're not going to fund me, there's no point in me being here. I might as well go. And whilst that does have a point, also look at the job that Gary O'Neill has done in the same situation, same circumstances. So it's kind of, it felt really disrespectful. And to do that on the eve of a Premier League as well, it is though we also waited for the maximum impact point and then did it. Now, I know some people say, well, maybe his position was untenable and he felt it was the only thing to do. Well, yeah, but that also is incredibly unprofessional. If we look at what also happened with the Real Madrid and Spain incident, and then that, it's, for me, it's two huge red flags as to his doing. And I know people would also say, well, Bielsa would have done it in the past. He'd walked out on teams if he felt he wasn't supported. Yes, but Bielsa was also known as El Loco. You knew with Bielsa that could happen. You knew that he was temperamental, and at any point he could literally throw his arms out and go, you know what, I'm actually done, and would walk.
I just think it's just a really bad mindset to have. Like, obviously we don't know the intricate details of what happened. He could have been promised a lot and given nothing. Then that's kind of a different story, and then it becomes kind of a power play. But he likely knew the restraints of a Wolves budget when he took the job. That's probably been made very clear to him and transparent to him. So if he's not willing, again, like you say, Gary O'Neill's been fantastic where he's coached his way through this, and he's got Wolves playing some very nice football, and they've got some impressive results this season, you know, away at Chelsea, away at Spurs, you know, they've done really, really well. So for Lopetegui to kind of turn around and do that, it's not the type of attitude that appeals to me in my next manager. It's not the up and coming, like, I want to build a project. It's, I need cash, give me cash or I'm gone. Like, it's not the mindset I want.
And that's what concerns me, is that, especially when we look at what happened in our January transfer window. Yes, you could say 6 1, half dozen the other. Some will argue, and possibly right, in that Moyes vetoed deals, he scuppered deals, and just was outright, I only really want this player. We had players that we could have bought, and then the owners, the you know, Tim Steidten and the manager wasn't set. So do we really need to go into a situation where we're going to have that again? And if Lopetegui, say, gets to a January window and feels that, say, he has a Wolves situation and walks out on us, then what? We're then sitting there going, oh, we're sitting there just in no man's land, having to scramble.
I guess the final kind of point for this before we give our conclusion is his approach on the director of football model. And again, we've seen this season, there's been clashes between Tim Steidten coming in and Moyes doing his job. It obviously started to get a little bit better, but now it's just completely gone with the recent stuff around the manager, which we won't get into in this video. We did a video on that yesterday. But Lopetegui said this about the director of football model. So he said, for me, a key question is the idea the sporting director has, because he's the one laying down the guidelines along which a club is run. If that fits you with your view, if he has the owners and directors on his side, convinced by that approach, then that's perfect. if you know each other already, if they know your work, that happens naturally. If they don't know you, maybe you go and do a presentation where you outline your ideas, strategies, methods. Sometimes a sporting director can win you over when you weren't sure, or the other way around. So it feels like to me that he's pretty on board with the model of a director of football. And if you're on that same wavelength together, it can be a very powerful component for a football club. We've seen the opposite of that, where really it's not gone well. And it's been a clash of personalities. It's been a clash of hierarchical structure. So does that side of Lopetegui maybe incite you a little bit more than what we've currently got set up?
Yeah, I think when you look at that point, because how we work with Mochi and at Sevilla are the epitome of that model. You know, they kind of like that Red Bull thing in that you buy cheap, you develop, you sell. So that's kind of how that they've kind of worked, and it's made them a very sustainable club. However, they're not I argue that's sustainable because they're hugely in debt. However, it kind of meant that they didn't often try and spend beyond their means. They often had to sell to kind of balance books and so on. But what it was clear is that he had a very good relationship with Mochi. And one of the things that Mochi was unable to do for him was to secure him the prolific striker. Yes, he had Yen and Naziri, and he had Murray, who also then went to Wolves. They were never consistently prolific enough. And I think even got Kasper Dolberg as well in the final season. But they just, especially in that final season, goals just were not coming as readily as they were previously.
Yeah.
But what it does show is that Lopetegui is willing to work with a director of football, and especially if they have a similar mindset on players and stuff, he's happy to kind of entrust them to work within their vision and try to implement it. As he kind of says, you know, if you don't know each other, then there's going to be that period where you're going to have to do that kind of, you know, meet and greet, showing your wares, you know, showing your drawers kind of thing. Yeah. And I think, to be honest, with Tim Steidten, regardless of whether he is or was naturally part of his plan, once the club made, I say the club, I'm not going to say the club, I'm going to say once David Sullivan made the decision that Lopetegui was part of that list, he would have done his due diligence in Tim Steidten. You know, Maximilian Hahn would have been crunching numbers, would have been looking at the data, so he would have assessed all of the things that happened during at Seville and how they played at Seville, how they worked at Wolves, to come up with an idea type of player that he needs, type of players that he uses, how he uses them, and a kind of maybe where their strong points were, where their weaknesses were. So he would have this numbers view of the manager need, much like how Liverpool first worked out that Jurgen Klopp, despite his bad last season at Dortmund, was the absolute pinnacle manager that they needed to go for, and how they've also assessed that Amorim and Arnold Slot were the top two for this. They use data. That's what Michael Edwards is a huge thing on. That's what Michael Edwards enforced, and that's why the players that they bought under Edwards were based on these numbers, and they all complemented each other.
So, what would you give this? You know, if we were to kind of sum this up, Lopetegui comes in. He arrives in the summer. We've got a budget to spend. We've got a rebuild to go. He's the new manager. What would you rate that managerial appointment out of 10? Just to summarize this.
Just based on who we've been linked to, who have been talked about as the main candidates, I can only say it's a 6, maybe a 7 if we can harness the Sevilla of those first 2 seasons. If we can play like that, and argue if we could play like Porto to a point, because Porto were very high scoring, they were quite stingy defensively. Didn't win a trophy, obviously, but if we could be more in that kind of mold, that more high intensity play, calm, composed in possession and intricate, then I'd say you're probably saying that's 7 and 8 kind of thing. If you get the one at Wolves, I think it's maybe 6, 7. But again, it's those red flags we've mentioned. Does not allow me to get excited, and actually puts me more about a 5, really, from a personal point of view. If I want to take any emotion out of it, probably actually a very strong candidate. If we look at his past and take out those elements, it's probably actually a very strong candidate, a very good fit because of the direction of football. However, I just cannot get past those red
Yeah.
flag moments, which really concern me.
Yeah.
Going forward.
I agree. I think that the whole red flags that we've gone through just brings it down. Like, if he didn't have that kind of bad behavior or antics, you know, previously, it would, again, like, you'd look at his job at Sevilla, even his job at Porto, the thing he did with the Spain national team. Like, he's had some pretty good impacts at the clubs he's been at. But again, it's just those things where, you know, at a club like West Ham, something will go wrong very quickly, and he's not always going to get his own way under the current ownership. So, you know, it's, for me, again, I would probably mark it around a 4 or 5 if it was to happen, just because I think it's the safe bet. I think it's agent driven, and I think it's Tim Steiden going, okay, I would probably pass this one based on probably other list of free agents or candidates that have also been progressed, probably the best of the rest. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this one. Obviously, reports are coming out that he's close to an agreement. Again, it's all up in the air at the moment. So yeah,
it's a really ambiguous one, isn't it?
Yeah,
you
exactly.
can have an agreement which is verbal. It doesn't actually mean there's a contract. Look at David Moyes. He said he had an agreement on a contract, but as it transpires, it was a verbal agreement. Based on where you finish. So
don't believe everything you read. Just wait for stuff concrete to happen, and hopefully we'll get some more updates on this soon. But yeah, let us know your thoughts on Lopetegui. Would you be open to the move at West Ham this summer if he was to come in as manager? What do you think about his style of play? Do you think that's a little bit more of an improvement on what we currently have? Yeah, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Leave a like on the video if you did enjoy it, and subscribe to the YouTube channel, as that massively helps us out. And Mike, until next time.
Come on, you Lions.